for anyone else who wants to look at this after today. So welcome, my name is Sarah Feenup. I'm a behavior specialist with the Lower Hudson Regional Partnership Center. We are housed out of the PNW BOCES, but we are technically funded through the Office of Special Ed in New York State. And my background is as a school psychologist and as a behavior analyst. And today we're going to be talking about what to look for in positive classroom management. Really, I want you to walk away today with some tools. So we'll be talking about a self-assessment tool that you can use. And if you're an administrator or a coach, you can also use that same tool as a walkthrough tool when you do walkthroughs throughout the building. And we'll also be looking at a resource that is guided by research and will allow you to really understand the different practices we're talking about today in more detail. So since we are funded through the Office of Special Ed, everything that we do is driven really by improving outcomes for students with disabilities. And our blueprint for improved results for students with disabilities comes from the New York State Education Department. And these are the main drivers of that work. And today we're going to be talking about this one here. Teachers provide research-based instructional teaching and learning strategies and supports for students with disabilities. And schools provide multi-tiered systems of behavioral and academic supports. So I know a lot of you wrote in the chat box, and I appreciate you doing so. It lets me know who's here today and what you want to get out of our hour. Really, I want you to be thinking about when we go back to school. We're not going to be talking so much about remote learning right now, but more so about when we go back to school. So think about it. I know it seems, when is it going to happen? What's it going to look like? But kind of imagine yourselves back in the building, and we're going to take these practices that we learned about today and apply them to when we go back in real life. Okay, and it's really a nice opportunity actually now, if you have the time, to be planning when we go back. Okay. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about just a quick overview of positive behavior support. It kind of gives us a foundation for our work today. We're going to be talking about 9 specific evidence-based classroom practices. Then we're going to be talking about that self-assessment / walkthrough tool that will allow you to assess how well things are going in that classroom. And then we'll look at a research-based resource guide that goes into more detail. And then we'll give you some time to think about what are your next steps now that you have this information. So our overview of positive behavior support. So I want social behaviors alike are taught and strengthened by similar instructional strategies. So just like learning how to do long division or how to write an opening, you can tell I'm not a writing teacher. I'm trying to be with my first grader. If you're trying to write an opening sentence or a main idea, those are taught in the same way that behaviors are taught, and that is through modeling, prompting the correct behavior, monitoring to see how the student is doing, and providing feedback, both positive feedback and corrective feedback, okay? And I know sometimes it's hard to remember because behaviors can make us, feel certain ways and can be very emotional, but behaviors really are just, they're all behaviors. Some are academic, some are social, but they're taught and strengthened in the same exact way. And we also want you to remember that the effectiveness of these classroom practices are maximized when they're implemented within a school-wide multi-tiered behavioral framework. So when you hear things like PBIS, which is positive behaviors, interventions, and supports, or MTSS, which is multi-tiered systems of support. These practices we're going to talk about today are much more effective if they're implemented within that school-wide framework, because it means everyone in the building is on the same page. Everyone is consistent, and students feel that consistency. They're getting that consistency everywhere they go, whoever adult they're talking to. And we know that they're more effective if the classroom and school-wide expectations and systems are linked. So talking about we'll get into your school-wide expectations and how they should be consistent in the classroom, and also that data system. Whatever data the teachers are taking informs the school-wide system. And we know that classroom practices are more effective when instructional design, curriculum, and delivery are in place. And of course, the data we just talked about. And I also wanted to make a note here that we're going to be talking mostly about Tier 1 classroom management strategies today, meaning what strategies are you providing for all students in your classroom as a foundation, as a prevention method, so that when students do need more support, it builds upon these foundational practices. Okay, so what that means is that the practices we're talking about today are necessary, but not sufficient for the kids who need intensive support. So kids that need tier 2 and tier 3 support, they might need more than what we're going to talk about today, but you absolutely need to have these 9 practices in place as a foundation to cut down on the challenging behaviors that occur in your classroom. So that being said, if you are, if you're seeing a lot of students in a particular classroom needing behavior support, more than 2 or 3, that means you really need to take a look at that tier 1 classroom management and make sure that's really in place, because if it's not, you're going to have a lot of kids looking like they need intensive support. Okay, so here's our 9 classroom practice look-fors. We're going to talk about these, some in more detail than others, but what I want you to do now is take a look at these 9 practices and write in the chat box one that you want to learn more about today, and I will try my best to do that for you. So take a look at these 9, and in the chat box write down 1 or 2, I guess, that you really want to try to learn more about today. I'll do my best. Uh-oh, I don't see anyone writing in the chat box. There we go. Thank you, Jennifer. She wants to learn more about opportunities to respond. Thank you. I know that she's paying attention and following along. Okay, behavior reminders. Thank you, Pam. 5 and 7, what's 5 and 7? Opportunities to respond, behavior reminders, instructional error corrections. Okay, we got a lot of behavior reminders. Active supervision, great. Wow, at least we're consistent. This was easy for me. Classroom expectations, thank you, Ram. Number 1, okay. Oh boy, now you guys are making it hard for me. Now you guys want everything. I asked, right? I asked, so this is what I'm getting. Okay. So what my plan is then, I'm going to go through a couple, and then we're going to look at some tools familiar and to yourselves so that you can look at them after today. And then depending on how much time we have left, I'll go back and talk about some more. Okay. Thank you. All right. So let's go through a couple that you did ask about. So physical arrangement, this is pretty self-explanatory. It's when you have designed the classroom to meet the needs of all students, but it is worth mentioning because if this is not in place, then none of the other practices are going to work out. So I've been in classrooms where it's just a mess and I don't know what is supposed to be happening and the kids don't know what's supposed to be happening and I can't see all the students, so this is important. So here's what you want to think about with this one. You want to ensure that all students can be easily seen and that they can see the teacher at all times. So I've actually heard some teachers say that they will sit in every student's desk at the beginning of the year and make sure that they can see the teacher. And then also you want to make sure that there's no places where kids can hide. Room is clean and organized, there's high traffic areas free from congestion, and that the layout is designed according to the type of activity taking place. That means that don't feel like you have to leave your desks and chairs in the same place all year long. Move them depending on what the activity is. I've seen high school classrooms get into a circle with their desks during discussion and then get back into rows during independent seat work time. So you can be flexible and that sort of thing. This is a resource for you. This is a website that you can use to plan out what your classroom will look like before you're actually moving all those heavy desks and chairs. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this now and then give me a moment to switch over the screen that I'm sharing. see, where's my mouse? There's my mouse. Okay. So now let me make sure I can show you the screen. Okay, so you should be able to see this website now. So I just clicked on that link, and if you, at the end of this session, I'll be asking you for your emails if you would like to share them, and I'll be sending out all these resources to you, so don't fret. This is a nice little website where it helps you pick, okay, well, what shape is my table? I have a rectangular table, a square table, what kind of furniture do I have? I have a door, I have a blackboard, what are my desks gonna look like? And you can actually move them around and see where you wanna place things. That way you're not actually moving everything around physically and exhausting yourself and trying to figure stuff out. So that's kind of nice. And we also have another one that's specific to preschools too, which I'll send you that link as well. Okay, let me go back to my PowerPoint here. All right, so that's the first one. The second one, I am moving a little quickly and we can always go back if needed. The second one is really, really important as well. This one is about routines. So these are making sure that all of the regular routines that happen throughout the day have been really thought out. They've been taught, they've been practiced, and the kids know exactly what the procedures are for the routines. So here's a list of common routines that I want you to be thinking about when you're teaching your students what the routines are. Dale, can you see this website here that has a list of 40 routines that are common?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, great. So this is a website just kind of giving you some ideas. So what do I need to teach my students so they know exactly what the procedure is for raising hands in my classroom? Do they have to raise hands? Do they have to raise their hand and wait to be called on? Can they raise their hand and shout out? Are there particular kinds of hand raising routines that they need to know? Like this means bathroom when it's a thumbs up, or this means I have to go see the nurse. What do you need to teach your students? Turning in papers, exactly what does that look like? Sharpening pencils, bathroom procedures. So really want to be thinking about before the school year begins, what does each one of these routines look like and how do I teach my students, reinforce it, give them lots of time to practice. And that in itself gives you a lot more instructional time back. So you're spending less time every single time you need to line up. For example, everyone remember you need to line up, bodies apart, hula hoop space in between each student, make sure your hands are at your side, facing forward. If you do that every single time you have to line up, you're wasting a lot of instructional time. But if you taught the procedure in the beginning of the year, or maybe a couple times a year you revisit it, then you're getting a lot of that instructional time back, okay? Let me go back to my PowerPoint here now. And we also want to make sure that teachers recognizing students when they follow those classroom routines and procedures. So that's positive reinforcement. We want to making sure that when students do the right thing, we're recognizing them for it so they keep doing it. And it also lets other kids in the classroom know what you're expecting and what you're paying attention to. So that could just look like, hey, I really like how this line right here is very, they're keeping their bodies to themselves, they're looking forward, great job. Or if you're teaching the independent seat work routine, oh my gosh, this table over here has their heads down, they're working hard, they're using a voice level of 1, good job. So you're recognizing what you expect instead of always focusing on correcting. And we also want to make sure that you're promoting the self-managed or student-guided schedules and routines. So the more your students are independent, the better. The less time you're going to have to spend on prompting and correcting them. So a lot of you are familiar with these. I know the class program and learning center and Pines Bridge over at P&W BOCES are really great about this. Here's what some of these self-managed routines could look like. So for this is like, looks like a lunch routine. So for a student that has maybe a little, little check boxes that they have on Velcro, they could use this to mark every single time they engage in one of these steps. So, okay, I know it's lunchtime. I need to get my lunch from my cubby. I need to bring my lunch to the table. I eat lunch, I throw away trash, I pick the book to read. So we call this like a mini schedule. And here's something that is maybe more appropriate for higher functioning students or students in middle or high school. As you enter the classroom, get a pencil and sheet of paper, sit in your assigned seat. So you would post this, you would teach it, and you would reinforce it throughout the year, so you don't have to always harp on your students when they're not doing what you want them to do. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and switch gears a little bit here, and I'm going to show you a tool that I think you're really going to like. Before I do that, though, I want to kind of check for your understanding and also engage you a little bit here, because I know I've been on lots of webinars and just listening to people talk is kind of exhausting and it's hard to pay attention. So what I want you to do now in the chat box is just in your own words, what does it mean to have classroom routines in place? In your own words in the chat box, what does it mean to have classroom routines in place? How would you know it if you saw it? Okay, so having a plan, it means structure and expectations, routines, what's expected and when, classroom routines in place, order, plan, kids working independently, smooth transitions. Yeah, great. Predictability, good. Okay, excellent. So one person asked, how do we do this remotely? So be thinking about, just like we did when we looked at that website, we listed out the different routines that your kids are gonna have to engage in. Spend some time thinking about what are those actual routines that you want students to engage in. And sometimes it helps to think first about what are they doing wrong or what's not going well. So you might think, okay, well, it really is problemsome when students are keeping their microphones unmuted during my instruction. So we need to teach that. So be thinking about, okay, the routine is once you sign on, you check to see that your microphone is muted. If it's not, click the mute button. And when I ask a question, unmute the button, say what you need to say, and then mute it again. Okay, this is off the top of my head. But you would actually write that out, and depending on the level of your student, you would attach visuals to it as well. And you would spend some time actually teaching it. You would actually, instead of jumping right into the math lesson, say, okay, we're gonna spend some time talking about how to mute your microphone. This is new to all of us, so let's talk about that. And you would, on the screen, post that list of skills or steps that they need to mute their microphone and when, and you would practice it. You might model it for them first, and then you might choose a student to practice it as well. You would reinforce it. And then every single time you have a lesson, you might just do a little reminder, just like I did at the beginning of our session today with something that looked like this. Okay, you mute your line unless you're talking. But you don't want to just say that. If it's been a problem, then you're going to want to explicitly teach it like I just said. Okay. Same with all of these, right? Always state your name first. If you have a question, write them in the chat box. Let's say you have a kid that keeps blurting out. Well, okay, we got to practice this routine of, if you have questions, write them in the chat box. So you're going to list out the steps. So we call that task analysis. All right, you think about your question, you open up the chat box, you type in your question, you wait for the teacher to respond. If she hasn't or he hasn't responded within 2 minutes, raise your hand in the little raising hand button. You're going to really spell that out for your students, and then teach it and remind it and reinforce it when you notice it. And reinforcing it might mean like a more explicit system in place where you have little points that you're awarding students for muting their line when they're supposed to. Hey, today during math class, we're going to be practicing muting our line, and I'm going to be looking to see if kids are muting their line, and if they are, I'm going to be giving up points, something like that. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to move on to one of the tools that I wanted to show you today, And then if we have time, I will go back to the other practices. Okay. Bear with me here while I share my screen. So this is a tool that you can use as a self-assessment tool or as a walkthrough tool, depending on your role, depending on your union, depending on what parameters you have in place, okay? So here is what it looks like. It's actually the 9 practices that we just talked about. Okay, I don't know why it's not letting me, that's okay. All right, so hopefully you can see these 9 practices. It says here, this assessment tool is designed for a teacher to rate him or herself and develop an action plan. It may also be used to by an observer to rate the classroom interventions and provide specific and contingent feedback that will assist in the development of an action plan. So you pick a teacher-directed activity that has a specific learning outcome. You assess whether each classroom management practice was evident, and you sum the number of yes to determine overall classroom management score. So you have the activity, you have the time that you've started, the total minutes, and then you're just marking yes or no. You can modify this by saying somewhat, or you can do a rating scale, but I found that just a simple yes or no is the most effective way to do it. And I've seen, you know, if you don't have the capability to be going in and observing other teachers and getting assessment data this way, I've seen teachers pair up with each other. So you'll have like a partner teacher will say, hey, will you observe me with this tool and I'll observe you? And that way you feel a little bit more comfortable. It's really, you know, it's not evaluative, and it's a way to really get another perspective on how well you're doing with these practices. Okay, here's what I want to talk about now for a moment. So depending on what role you're in, whether you're a teacher or an administrator or an aide or a teaching assistant, I really want you to be thinking about how to use this tool to improve practices in a systematic way. And here's what we've seen other schools do that's been really, really effective. Now, this is kind of a long-term project. This might be something that you want to focus on for the whole school year. And here's how you would do it. You would first collect baseline data on the current implementation of practices. So that means if you're your own teacher, your teacher, you might use that self-assessment tool a couple times, 2 or 3 times throughout the week, kind of sum those data together and say, okay, what am I doing well with? What do I need to improve on? If you're an administrator or a coach of some sort, you would use the walkthrough tool, the same tool, but in a walkthrough way, to again collect baseline data on how well the practices are being implemented. And again, you're going to make sure that people understand it's not evaluative. Maybe you're looking for volunteers first to see how this goes so you get some buy-in. Then you're going to provide specific feedback to the teacher or teachers and develop an action plan together. So again, it's not evaluative. It's like, okay, how are we going to work on this together? Then you're going to provide training and coaching on the selected practice. That could look a variety of different ways. It could be you as a coach or an administrator providing feedback. It could be training and coaching that you provide at 5 minutes at every staff meeting. And this is something that collectively as a staff we're working on. Okay, everyone, we noticed that we all need to work on our routines a little bit better. So we're going to be focusing on routines for the first half of this year. So let's really get into that for 5 minutes every staff meeting, for example. Then you're going to collect progress monitoring data using the same tool on the implementation of the practice. So let's say you use the walkthrough tool, you've got your baseline data, you notice routines are not really as strong as you'd like, so you're going to focus on that, you're going to provide some training and coaching, you're going to use that same tool again as progress monitoring to see, okay, how are we doing? Are we getting better? Are we getting better? Some are getting better, some are not. Let's see how we're doing. Then you're going to provide more feedback. And then you're just going to keep repeating steps 3 to 5. You're going to provide training. You're going to collect data. You're going to give feedback. You're going to provide training. You're going to collect data. You're going to provide feedback. And it's going to look different depending on your role and your setting, but this is what the whole improvement process looks like. So here's an example of if you were to use the walkthrough data in your whole school. And I've seen schools do this where they have gone into every single classroom and they've used that classroom management tool, classroom management walkthrough tool. Let me go back. Okay, and they've taken, you know, the 30 teachers that they've observed, and they've taken the 30 sheets, and they've counted up the yeses, and they've aggregated them, and they've said, okay, where are we strong? Where are we needing some improvement? And their data could look like this. So we have about 89% of teachers have physical layout in place, right? 89% of teachers had a yes checked for physical layout. And we have about 65% of teachers classroom routines in place, and so on and so forth. And you could see, well, where do we want to focus on our classroom management practices as a school? So in the chat box, if you were an administrator, let's say you are an administrator, let's say you're not, but let's pretend that you are if you're not. Let's say you're an administrator, we're going to pretend, and these are your data. Where would you focus your improvement practices? There's no right or wrong answer. Some might say, oh, we're almost at 100, so I want to get there. Or we're about 70%, so we're going to aim for 80%. Or, oh, God, we're really low here. So where would you focus your improvement practices, meaning your training, your coaching, your feedback, if these are the data that you saw in your school? Let's see what you write in the chat box here. So someone said, I would focus on behavior-specific praise, as that's the practice that is most lacking. Behavior-specific praise, expectations taught. Okay. Yeah, so there's really no right or wrong answer. They're all important practices, right? It just depends on where would you want to focus. Some might say expectations taught because that's really foundational, and if kids don't know what the expectations are, how can we expect them to do well? So I'm going to focus on that. Some might say, wow, behavior specific praise is really low, so we've got to get that up. So great, thank you for your feedback. Okay, so let's move on here. Now we're going to take a look at this resource here. So this is the second and final resource I'm providing for you today. This is Evidence-Based Classroom Strategies for Teachers, and it takes the 9 practices we just talked about and goes into more detail. So in a moment, Dale is going to share this tool with you. But for right now, I am going to, thank you, Dale. Dale shared the self-assessment tool with you. I appreciate that. And not yet, but in a moment, she's going to share this tool that I'm showing you right now. Okay. So I'm going to go through it a little bit slowly because it can be a little overwhelming at first. There's a lot to it. But once you figure it out, it's very easy. Okay. Where is the thing I want to show? Thank you for being patient, everybody. Got a lot of screens here. I'm just trying to show my... Where is it? Okay, here we go. Thank you for being patient. All right, so this is this tool here, the Supporting and Responding to Behavior tool. It's long, it's 30 pages, but we're going to walk through it together slowly. So if you go on to page 4, which you'll get this tool in a moment, you'll be able to do this. You can see kind of an interactive map here. So these are the foundations. We talked about settings, routines, expectations, the prevention strategies, responding, which means when behaviors happen, how do you respond? and then data systems here. And you can click on any one of these blue links and it will send you to that area. So if you go to routines, it'll tell you more about those routines. Another area here, which is right on page 5, right after page 4 here. This is interactive map on page 4. This is a self-assessment on page 5. And it's really the tool that I just showed you, but in a more interactive way. So it's really the same thing. So again, you would mark, you could use this or you could use the other one and say yes or no. But again, what I like about this is that you can click on the links, on the blue links, and it sends you to that area. So I want to know more about routines, and you go right to here. So what these pages tell you is the description and the critical features of each practice, then the elementary examples, secondary, non-examples, and empirical support and resources. So I'm actually going to go back to my PowerPoint and walk through that a little bit more slowly here, because I know this page can be overwhelming. So here's that page I was just showing you. So we have the description. So exactly what is it? Elementary examples, secondary examples, non-examples, which means what should I avoid when I'm implementing this practice, and some empirical support and resources, which is like the evidence behind it, right?
Sarah, we're still on your video screen.
Okay, thanks. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint now? Can you see this now, Dale, with the big gray box?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to walk through this because it was overwhelming to me at first visually, and I think it's a nice tool, but I want to walk you through it. So we have these description, elementary, secondary, non-examples, empirical support. The description and features just tells you about, well, what is it? Okay, we establish predictable patterns and routines, it promotes smooth operation, yada, yada, yada. And this is what it looks like, right? We talked about what that could look like with the routines spelled out explicitly. We have the elementary examples here. So here are some ideas for when to establish routines. Okay. Secondary examples, non-examples. So, assuming students know exactly what your routines and procedures are, don't assume, especially like this remote learning, right? We're all learning it. So you really got to teach it explicitly. Okay, and then of course, missing opportunities to provide reminders and feedback. We definitely want to do that. And there's that empirical support. Okay, so now you know how to really use the tool. So what I'm going to ask Dale to do is to share this tool in the chat box. And it's okay if you don't see it. I'm going to have a plan B if you're not able to see the resource that she's putting into the chat box. But assuming that you can open up the tool, you're going to start on page 5, which was that self-assessment page, and just kind of play around with it. Click on one of the blue links to learn more about one of the practices, and then be prepared to write in the chat box something like, I learned blank, or I liked blank. So we'll spend about 4 or 5 minutes doing this, and then we'll come back and either talk about more practices or open it up for questions. Okay, so Dale, have you shared the tool yet? I can't.
I believe I have, yes.
For some reason, I'm not pulling up the. Perfect, okay. So I see that she has shared it, thank you, Dale. And it's a PDF, so you should be able to click on download and open up the document and start on page 5. And again, our directions are for you to click on a link to learn more about a practice. So maybe it's more about routines, maybe it's more about opportunities to respond, and then be prepared to write in the chat box, I learned blank or I liked blank. And if you're not able to open up that document, just put a note in the chat box, and I'm going to go to plan B. Yeah, so some people are on their phones, so they're probably not able to open the document. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go to Nicole, which practice would you like to learn more about? And I'll just open it up on my screen. Nicole or Janelle, is there a particular link? Sorry, is there a particular practice you want to learn more about? And I'll just open it up on my screen so you can see it. And we'll send you the document later. Okay, so a lot of people said opportunities to respond. So thank you, Nicole. Reinforce good behaviors. Okay. So I'll look at behavior specific praise and opportunities to respond for those of you that are not able to open it. Okay, so I could just go over here and say, okay, I want to learn more about opportunities to respond. So this means that what you don't want to do over here, let's look at the non-examples first. Right. Okay, we haven't talked about this at all, but summarize the work quietly for 45 minutes, or the teacher provides a 20-minute lesson without asking any questions or don't want to do, right? You don't want to just be talking and delivering at your class without any kind of responses. There's a lot of research to show that the more responses your students make, the higher the learning and the better the classroom management and the better the behaviors. So when we see a lot of challenging behaviors crop up, that typically it could mean that they're not as engaged, right? So opportunities to respond keeps kids engaged. So there's kind of three main opportunities to respond. One is individual or small group questioning. That means that you're just posing a question to a student or posing a question to the group. And that's kind of what we're used to, right? We do that all the time. But one thing we want to be thinking about is instead of calling on someone that's raising their hand, get into the practice of calling on non-volunteers. And that's a culture that you need to set up from the beginning with your students, that in our classroom, I call on non-volunteers. That means even if you don't have your hand raised, I'm going to call on you. And you do that randomly with either popsicle sticks or an app of some sort that, you know, goes through the kids' names randomly. And you're teaching your kids to get used to the idea of that if you get called on, you answer the question. And if you don't know it, that's okay. You can say pass. That's an alternative too that you can use. But it's a way to get all kids engaged and to really prevent kids from opting out of participating. Another way to have an opportunity to respond is choral responding, and that means you're posing a question and all the kids respond in unison. And that is appropriate for when the response is a one-word or short word answer, right? It wouldn't be like an answer is like a whole paragraph, then you wouldn't want to be hearing the kids, you know, talking in unison. That wouldn't make any sense. But if it was something like, what is 4 + 4? Ready, class? Go. 8. Great. You got everyone to respond. That's an opportunity to respond. It's keeping kids engaged. The more responding, the better they're engaged. And then the nonverbal responses are things like response cards, those little mini dry erase boards, some kind of, Kahoot or other online way to get kids engaged. So they're responding. There's some kind of behavior that they're emitting to keep them engaged, okay? And then you can click on any of these links over here and it sends you to other resources and other videos as well, all right? And then I'll do one more. I'll do behavior specific praise. So here's some non-examples over here. Let's look at the non-examples first. Great job, super, wow. And those are nice and positive, but they're not specific. Or another non-example is, Brandy, I like how you raised your hand. And then 2 minutes later, Brandy, that was a nice response. The praising is the same student over and over again while ignoring other students. So we don't want to do that. And another non-example is saying nice hand raising after yelling at 20 students in a row. So that's not keeping up a high ratio of positive and negative statements. And then the last one here, thank you for trying to act like a human. That's sarcasm, right? We don't want to use sarcasm. So instead, some examples we have are things like, hey, I really liked how you raised your hand, Miguel. Or, hey, I really appreciate you took your hood off, Monica. Or this group over here has pushed in their chairs like I asked, great job. So behavior specific praise means telling the kid exactly what they did well. The good job, good going, nice is positive, but it doesn't let the student know what they're doing well, which means they're not likely to do it again in the future. So saying exactly what they did well is a really nice way to get that behavior to happen again in the future, okay? All right, so let's see. Do we have anybody sharing what they liked or what they learned from this resource? I hope some people were able to open it up. Okay, so someone said I like the nonverbal responses, so that's a way to get an opportunity to respond in there. Great. All right, the choral responses, yep, that's a nice way to get kids engaged. Everyone reporting, responding at the same time. Awesome. We'll wait for a couple more people to respond what they liked about this or what they learned from this tool. Choral responding, behavior specific praise, okay. Great. All right, so I'm gonna come back up here and share my screen and all right. I'm going to go through a couple of these quickly. We talked about routines. We talked about, all right, so classroom expectations is the third one. I know some of you said you wanted to know about that. That is really just coming up with 3 to 5 broad expectations. And if you have school-wide PBIS, it's vital that they're consistent with your school-wide system so that students experience consistency throughout the building and that all teachers are saying the same thing. So this is a way to identify what you want your students to be doing, and it allows you as an adult to have the language to prompt. When you don't see what you want, you're going to prompt it using these words. All right, I want to see everyone being safe in the playground. I want to see everyone having their bodies to themselves and having walking feet. Or, all right, we're about to get into a learning activity. I want everyone to be kind by sharing, taking turns, and using gentle hands. It gives you the language as a teacher to be consistent. And here's another example for high school. All right, they have attitude, honor, and safety. And they've identified what that looks like in the classroom. And then here's an example for preschool. They have the nice visuals there. They've identified safe, be kind, be responsible. So what you want to remember for these expectations is that they're positively stated, they're easy to remember, and that they're consistent across the school building. So that takes some time sometimes to all be on the same page. But I will tell you that safe, respectful, responsible are the most common expectations that we see in schools across the region. Again, I'll say it again, be safe, be respectful, be responsible. They cover everything. They're unanimously agreed upon, and everyone, you know, it really applies everywhere. Okay, and then active supervision is when your teacher is moving, scanning, and interacting with their students. And basically it doesn't look like this, right? You don't want their back to be to the students all the time. Obviously they have to have your back to the students sometimes, but the idea is that you want to be scanning, you want to be looking, you want to be moving to make sure that you are seeing everything. And that you don't want to be seeing this, right? You don't want to be seeing your staff on their phones or being off task. You want your staff to be looking. You want your staff to be moving. You want them to be interacting with students positively so that they can prompt and reinforce to prevent those problem behaviors from happening. We talked about high rates of opportunities to respond. We talked about these 3 kinds. Here's an example of the nonverbal response. So using those dry erase boards. You can buy mini dry erase boards. You can also, well, you know, with remote learning, that's a nice way to do it on the chat box or to share your screen. But you can also just take a sheet protector, those plastic, put a blank piece of paper inside, like a cardstock or even probably a regular piece of paper inside that screen paper, what is it called, page protector, and then dry erase markers will work on that. And then ask kids to bring in an old clean sock and they can use that as their eraser. Okay. This is a really nice way for teachers to see if 80% of their students are getting the right answer. If 80% of the students are not getting the right answer, that means you need to reteach. It's not a problem with the students, it's a problem with how you taught it. So it's a nice quick way to get some formative assessment going. We talked about behavior specific praise. Here are some examples and non-examples. So in the blue, you can see you're talking about exactly what the behavior was that they did well. And this is a nice way when other kids are not doing the right thing. If you praise the kid that is doing the right thing, other kids will follow suit 9 times out of 10. There's a nice video that I'll send you about this, which highlights why it's important to be specific in your praise rather than just general. Because if you are general in your praise, like, good job, thanks, they might get the wrong idea about, well, what did I do well? I don't really understand what I did well. Some of you wanted to know about behavior reminders. This is really, really important, but easy to forget to do. Even as a behavior analyst and as a parent of 2, I forget to do. It's just a reminder. It's about thinking what you want the kid to do. So thinking about those behavior expectations, thinking about those routines that you taught. And before you get into that situation that is usually problematic, reminding the student of what the expected behavior is. So if I know my students have a hard time getting straight to their do now activity in the morning, as kids are walking in, I might give a behavior reminder or what we sometimes call prompt or pre-correct and say, hey, welcome to the class today. Nice to see you. Remember, get started on your do now as soon as you sit down. Oh, I see Jose got started right away. So you're pairing that reminder with praise. So you're reminding students what to do instead of just waiting for the problem to happen and then error correcting, error correcting, error correcting. Okay. Okay, and then when you are providing error corrections, there's a lot more to this. I could go on and on for days about different interventions for students who need more support, but as a general tier 1 practice, when you're providing error corrections, what you don't want to do is get into a power struggle. What you don't want to do is embarrass the student. What you don't want to do is take a lot of time away from instruction. You want to be, what you do want to do is be matter of fact and say exactly what you want the student to do instead. So let's say a student is turning around in their seat. Instead of saying, how many times have I told you not to stand, or how many times have I told you not to turn around in your seat? You're bothering everybody. You're taking away from instruction. Look, she doesn't like you doing that. Okay, we're not gonna do that because it's embarrassing. It's pointing out the negative behavior. It's not teaching the appropriate behavior. It's taking time away from instruction. It's not building rapport with your students. Instead, we're going to say, I like how Molly over here is facing forward. And then if the kid does it appropriately, hey, I really like, Jose, that you turned around like you're supposed to. Good job. Or just saying, Jose, I need you to face. So you're telling the student exactly what they need to do. It's brief, it's concise, it's calm, it's respectful, and usually it's private if you can. And then as soon as the student engages in the appropriate behavior, you praise them. Hey, I noticed that you turned around. Thanks, I appreciate it. This seems like, oh yeah, right, our problems are way harder than that. Our problems are way worse than that. That's not gonna solve our problems. But I would really take a look and see if this is happening first as a tier 1 strategy, because this can cut down on a lot of problems. If you just succinct, brief, private, polite, tell them what they need to do instead, okay? And then we talked about data systems a little bit. Here's a nice tool that you can use as a teacher to keep track of those minor infractions. This means these are not behaviors that are going to behavior management staff, or these are not going to the administrator. These are minor infractions, and this is something you could just keep track of on your own. And then as a teacher, when something becomes a pattern, then you can have evidence to show the crisis team, the behavior team, the clinicians, the administrator, whatever, and say, here you go, these are the patterns I have. What do I need to do now? So let's take a look at the chat box and see what we have coming up here. We have nice emails here so we can send you materials. Awesome. Great. Okay, so we have a couple minutes left. I'm going to open it up for questions. You can unmute and say your name and ask your question, and I'll try to answer them. If you have to go, then that's okay too. We welcome any emails from you. I'll put my email up here. If you have any emails, you can ask me today, tomorrow, when we get back to school. And we will be sending you these materials so you'll have them for yourself. Okay. But if there are any questions now, I'm happy to hear. Okay, don't think we have any questions. So that means that you all paid attention really well and learned, and you are excited to use these materials when we go back to school and get back to the real world, right? All right, well, thank you everybody, and have a wonderful day, have a wonderful week, and please let me know if you need anything. All of our resources and materials and support are always free, so just let us know, okay? All right, thank you everybody.